Welcome to Trauma Training Tuesday, everybody. We're super glad you're here. It looks like more people are coming in. Thankfully, I have my beloved co-host, Kelsey Hopkins, with me here today to make sure that things go as smooth as they can go. Thanks again for being here. My name is Amy Ebbeson. I am a licensed clinical social worker at Worcester Addresses Childhood Trauma. And I am really excited to talk to you today about intergenerational trauma. It's a huge topic. It's a new topic. Not meaning it's new. Intergenerational trauma is not new. It's new that we have so many more technologies than we ever had before to understand it and find proof out about it and study it at the genetic level. So it's pretty cool and amazing that we have that. Um, all right. I just wanted to, I think Kelsey's gonna be on chat duty. Um, I have so much, Irene, great to see you. I have tons of slides and content. I really kind of thought a lot about the order of how I was going to talk about things, and I don't love where I landed. So just know that there's a lot of different pieces that I feel like make this full picture, um, and hopefully it comes together and makes sense. And if it's not as it's going, I'll have plenty of, I hopefully have time for questions. You can put them in the chat as well. One challenge is when I am sharing my screen, I can't see anything else. So I'm going to be reliant on you all to either jump in or let Kelsey know or use the chat. It's hard to know how things are landing when you can't see. Um, Yay. Um, does that look okay for everybody?
Yeah, it's looking great, Amy.
Uh,
Thanks.
Thank you, Kels. All right, welcome again to talking about intergenerational trauma. Generational trauma, also known as intergenerational or transgenerational trauma, is when a cycle of trauma is passed through families. And again, I'm at Worcester Addresses Childhood Trauma. The website is there. If you get a chance, this recording will be published on the website. We've been doing Trauma Training Tuesdays, a deeper dive on a specific trauma form since 2020. So there's over 100 hours at this point of specific trauma content. And I'm very grateful that many of you in the audience are people that I know and love and know well. So you've seen all my stuff. And it can be repetitive. You might have seen some of these things before, but if you're like me, trauma content is so deep and layered that I'm always learning. I do this work all the time. I'm always immersed in it, and I still learn new things all the time or new ways of seeing things. And I'm hoping that's true for all of you as well. The picture I chose for this, I think, really tells a story in and of itself. It's those nesting dolls. And, you know, each doll opens and there's a smaller doll inside. And you can see in this picture, the outer doll has been stabbed right through. Um, that's the idea of intergenerational trauma. A hurt to one is going to hurt all of the subsequent ones, right? It's going to be lesser and smaller injury as it goes on, but it is in fact going to hurt all of the internal, all the nesting dolls. Um, and a lot of the information is from the Institute on Intergenerational Trauma, which is Australian. I think they're a little bit further along than us. in reconciling their history of generational trauma and the cycles that have kind of continued unaddressed and unlooked at. So, today, my hope in the next couple of hours is to connect our personal experiences to a much bigger picture in service of better understanding what you inherited, what is really not yours. And we're doing this not to make you feel helpless or overwhelmed by things you can't control, but we're doing this in the knowledge that self knowledge leads to personal growth, and insight is the best indicator of mental health. For clinicians, when we're assessing how you're doing, what we're almost always looking for is, do you see it? Do you see what's happening? Do you see your role in it? Do you see the replays? Do you see the symptoms? So seeing it, being aware is huge. You're really going to need to continue to practice self care and self compassion. And I know that can feel buzzwordy, um, but what I mean is put yourself first in this next couple of hours. Whatever you need to do to take care of yourself is completely fine with me. If you want to just take a break, step away, put your camera off, get a drink, return when you can, not say a word, whatever you want to do to take care of you is important. We can't hear this information or take in this information if we're overly dysregulated or we're triggered or activated. So take care of yourself. Try do whatever you can do to keep yourself feeling okay. The first thing I always talk about when talking about mental health and mental illness and trauma is stigma. And stigma comes first because it is the overwhelmingly huge force in our culture that tells us that we can't talk about our feelings, our emotions, mental health, mental illness. It's a mark of disgrace or infamy, a stain or reproach as on one's reputation. That's sort of the Webster definition of what stigma is. Um, there's a stigma of mental illness, and that is a barrier that keeps people from talking about this and from keeping help. One of the sort of first pieces of generational trauma is the fact that many of our parents and grandparents didn't talk at all about what had happened to them. They didn't share. Um, Yet they were impacted by it. So we didn't know what was happening, but we saw the results. That's stigma about that, about talking about things. This happens at the individual level. I know myself, even as a clinician, even as an expert in this, I feel really badly when I need to ask for help or when I'm depressed or when my mood isn't where it should be. I know that that's totally normal, but I still have absorbed all those messages that tell me that I'm bad or wrong or what is wrong with me, that I'm having these problems and issues. It happens in our families. Many of us here today, our families have told us to just stop talking about it, get over it, pretend it's not happening. Our larger groups, our systems, our culture, we're getting this message all over the place and from everywhere. The cartoon I have on this slide, to me, really illustrates how stigma shows up in super harmful ways. This cartoon is the same picture on the top screen and on the bottom screen. The top screen is labeled physical illness. The man's lying there. He says, I feel like I'm dying. His helper says, we need to get you to the hospital as soon as possible. The bottom panel, exact same picture. The man says, I feel like I'm dying. But this one is labeled mental illness. So his helper says, just try and remember, a lot of people have it a lot worse. Our response to mental illness is not at all on par with our response to physical illness. It absolutely should be. Mental illness takes lives just as frequently and dramatically as physical illness does. yet we act like it's no thing. Um, the amount of stigma you experience is going to depend on your unique individual positionality. I'll talk more about that in the next slide. Men experience more stigma. You probably noticed there's significantly more women than men here today. Men are even more penalized for talking about feelings and mental health. Stigma, as I have said, is a big contributor to generational trauma. Positionality or intersectionality is this idea that we are all unique and we're all many things. We belong to multiple groups, multiple identities. We have a gender identity, a sexual orientation identity, ability, disability, a racial identity. In American culture, groups are not afforded the same amount of power and access to resources. So, this stuff, what group we're in, is going to impact our stress level. Different cultures have historically viewed mental illness as weakness, a character flaw, or even demonic possession. So many of us are getting even stronger messages from our cultures about mental health and mental illness and not talking about it. Because of sexism, men experience more stigma. We have decided that everything in the realm of feelings is feminine. So if you're going to talk about feelings, well, that's girly, and you're going to be subject to sexism. You might even be called names. All right. Whew, heavy already. And here we are at trauma. The DSM definition of trauma is an occurrence which would be notably distressing to almost anyone. So, something that happens that, of course, it's going to be horrible. You're in an accident, you're in a fire, you witness a murder, anything like that. And the exposure can be your direct experience, the thing happening to you, witnessing it happening to others, or even learning that it happened to others in the past. So that really helps ground generational trauma in the definition of trauma. In the DSM, which this is from, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, that is what mental health practitioners use for all things mental illness. It's put out by the American Psychiatric Association. Um, there's not a diagnosis called generational trauma, but we can see that with this definition, generational trauma will apply. It should be, it's in there. I want to talk for a second about sort of what brings me to this work on generational trauma and understanding generational trauma. So the Worcester Act story, Worcester Acts, and the Act stands for Addresses Childhood Trauma. The Worcester Act story started in like 2017, but it was predated by a big community planning effort. Um, Sort of like we do now, in 2015, Worcester had a pretty significant problem with gang violence. We at Clark University, Lori Ross, who was one of the originators of this project, got a bunch of money to study the drivers of gang violence. What's going on here? Um, so what we did was interview people that were considered proven risk. That'll be more on the next slide. But the assessment that took about a couple years identified the following drivers of youth violence: family stress, unemployment, early childhood trauma, generational cycles of gang involvement, limited neighborhood recreation opportunities, and punitive school discipline. So this whole story is about generational trauma. There's this sort of trauma in Worcester. So this was the people that participated in this research study that gave us this baseline of what's going on here. And these young men were labeled proven risk, meaning we knew by indicators when they were pretty young that they were already on path to be gang involved. Among this group, 95% of the participants were Black, Latino, or multiracial. So, right out of the gate, racial trauma is implicated. 30% had police contact before the age of 12 as victims or witnesses. So these kids were seeing police come into their community, into their neighborhood, and even their home from an early age. They had substantial police contact that got increasingly violent as they got older. And this group of young men, probably no surprise, were struggling. They were struggling in school, they weren't learning, they were having behavior challenges. Many of them had pretty significant mental health issues and substance abuse issues. At least 30% of them, 30 out of about the 90 we looked at, already had one or more children. So we could see that this, here we go, this is unhealed and being passed already. Um, and I, just as a side note, my work has told me again and again and again that traumatized people need help, not punishment. Yet our culture just continues to punish people that are hurting. Is this normal? Right? Sort of, we can see that for these young kids, normal is whatever's going on around them. If your parents are getting in trouble because they're in gangs, well, then it's pretty likely you're going to be getting in trouble for being in a gang. The DSM, again, our big book there, uses the phrase within normal range for almost every diagnostic criteria has within normal range in it. And what the heck? All right. So, normal is whatever you see going on around you. There is no such thing as normal. Dr. Gabor Mate just wrote a book called The Myth of Normal, really addressing this fact that who's normal? Um, Norms are personal, social, cultural. Norms are also invisible and indisputable. A lot of times we just say things aren't normal without grounding it in anything. Norms are going to impact the way we feel, the way we think, and our behaviors. Whatever you saw around you is your version of normal. We don't really learn that there's other things different until we're old enough to go to other people's houses. We might see it on TV. We might compare to other people in our family, but that's, sort of within that same realm. Our whole range is really impacted by what we grow up with. I'm not going to read it because I'm already probably taking more time. But this poem, Children Learn What They Live, was hanging in the very first job I had at a residential treatment center. And it really, really struck me that, of course, whatever you see is how you're going to be. You know what? I am going to read it. If a child lives with criticism, he learns to condemn. If a child lives with hostility, he learns to fight. If a child lives with ridicule, he learns to be shy. If a child lives with shame, he learns to feel guilty. If a child lives with tolerance, he learns to be patient. If a child lives with encouragement, he learns confidence. If a child lives with praise, he learns to appreciate. If a child lives with fairness, he learns justice. If a child lives with security, he learns to have faith. I know that many of us never even had a baseline of safety. Normal and safe um, don't exist together for many of us. Trauma impacts everything. And we learned this from the ACE study. I do imagine that most people here today have heard of the ACE study. ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, not ACE like I got an ace in the card deck. And this was a study, a huge study. It's over 30 years old at this point, but they asked participants in the study about things that happened in their childhood that we would all agree are traumatic: physical abuse, sexual abuse, poverty, missing parent, anything like that was considered an adverse childhood experience. We gave you a point for every bad thing that you had happen to you. And this study mapped that number to every single cause of death. They were a big health insurance company, so they had all this data about who was getting sick and how and what was happening. And again, every single cause of death was linked to childhood trauma. Trauma impairs your memory, your ability to concentrate, your new learning, your ability to focus. No surprise those kids growing up in gang culture were not doing well in school. Trauma has been correlated to heart disease, obesity, addiction, pulmonary illness, diabetes, autoimmune disorders, and cancer. Trauma impacts your ability to trust people, to cope, and to form healthy relationships. It disrupts your ability to identify your emotions, to calm yourself down, to control how big your expression of emotions are, and your ability to distinguish between what's safe and unsafe. Trauma shapes your beliefs about yourself and about other people. It impacts your ability to be hopeful and your whole outlook on life. You can see even this pyramid, the hierarchy of needs idea, pyramid, like things build on top of each other. It starts with generational embodiment of historical trauma at the bottom. Then we have social conditions and local context of social conditions. That happens before this kid is ever even here. And then we have this environment that supports bad outcomes, adverse childhood experiences. That is going to disrupt a child's development. It's going to lead to all kinds of social problems. And this early death idea is really inevitable and not a huge surprise. One of the ways this gets transmitted is the way that trauma impacts your brain. I was talking before we started about how we only now know some of these generational things at the DNA level in the sort of 2015 that became really popular and accessible. We didn't have the material to study the brain until the 90s. So this is still even new stuff. When I was in an undergrad in the early 90s, and I was learning about brains when they would deep freeze them, slice them, put dye in them. So we were only ever learning about a brain that wasn't in use. In the 90s, we got all these new technologies that have shown us much more about brain development. The super coolest thing about your brain is that it is a use dependent organ. What that means is it sets itself up, it figures out what it has to learn by what's going on around it. Every single thing that happens is shaping the architecture of your brain. And you can see I have the pictures here, sort of that first picture is that path in the woods. If you keep cutting through to your friend's house, a path is gonna develop. If that happens all day, twice a day, multiple years, it's gonna be more like a paved road. If you have a lot of feeling or emotion in it, that supercharges it. It becomes like a superhighway, right? So these are the structures that are guiding our brain activity. The more an experience happens, the better traveled the path is. So the coping mechanisms, the what are we going to have to learn? What is life going to be like from our childhood? Set up our brain. That becomes our default. So abuse could feel normal and expected. If you're growing up in a very mad and very sad environment as a mad, sad kid, you have built a mad and a sad brain. That means that that's going to be right where you go. It's just going to be where you default without active work to get it to change. One of the things that is so harmful about trauma is that it always seems to come with shame. It's like the cereal box prize that you didn't want. You just wanted the cereal, you didn't want the stupid prize, and you didn't want this trauma, but yet here is shame. Even young kids that can barely talk, that are victimized, blame themselves. They have this shame piece. Shame is a private, self conscious experience where individuals feel weak and vulnerable. It can cause you to feel deficient or humiliated. It impacts your sense of self worth and dignity. It's a painful feeling about yourself as a person. Brene Brown has done most of the work on shame, and she talks about guilt versus shame. Guilt is I did something bad, and shame is I am bad. When people are traumatized, they always question themselves. They take some responsibility and blame, and not deserved at all. It's just a mechanism of it, and it makes you feel very vulnerable and exposed. So, of course, it's going to impact your relationships, how you're feeling about yourself. Your brain default is going to impact how you interact with people out there in the world. Um, Trauma is going to create or affirm bad beliefs about yourself. When we're a kid, the power difference is huge. And that's part of why this is so impactful. Trauma needs power, right? So whenever there's a big power difference, it's much more likely that something's going to be traumatic. If you're a parent who has PTSD because of something that happened to you, this is going to have a big impact on your kid. As you're sort of aging and you look at your kid at the age that you were when the bad thing happened, you can really have a hard time sort of distinguishing what was your experience, what's your kid's experience. You can really be re experiencing it as you're watching your kid. Your negative feelings can get transferred onto the kid. You're either going to over or under identify with what's happening and what's going on. And we'll talk more about that. You might project all of your stuff onto your kid, blaming them. This is about your internalized hurt and shame. When we have been victimized, when we have experienced trauma, we can really start developing this lens of everyone is a victim or a perpetrator and figuring out where we fit in the victim or a perpetrator lens. I put this picture on here because it just sort of speaks to some of the really twisted ways this gets transmitted. This is a person, seemingly an adult, with a kid hitting, I'm doing this because I love you. And the kid says, thank you, right? When you're a child and the abuse by an adult is happening, your really only choice is to believe that you deserve it, something's wrong with you. And you can, if you believe that your parent or the caretaker is like a sick, messed up person, what are, yikes, what are you going to do with that? It's much safer to put it on yourself, and that carries through. So trauma is going to affect our life choices. That's not hard to see so far. If we don't have any experiences of being safe, all we know is unsafe. We're only going to, we can't tell the difference. I know for myself, the recognition that I was confusing things that were safe with things that were familiar was a huge light bulb moment for me. Things in our life go on repeat because of this. We are, the environment is shaping our choices, it's shaping our feeling about ourselves, and we're going to keep on doing these same things. That's why this is like trauma cycles, falling into that same trap again and again. We call this the repetition compulsion, the idea that without attention, awareness, and insight, you're just going to keep on doing the same things, and they're going to keep on bringing you the same results. When we don't see it, we keep telling ourselves this time is going to be different. Our judgment is absolutely impacted and impaired by what happened to us and by what we know from our childhood. When you have trauma, it's very, very common and normal and makes perfect sense that you might turn to self medication, meaning, I'm in distress. What am I going to do? I need some help. And if you even got there in the first place, that's amazing because so rarely do people ask for help. But if you do, we'll send you to a therapist and and I know that this is stereotypical, but that's intentional. The therapists are almost always a white woman. She might say, give me 2 or 3 months in therapy and you'll begin to feel better. Because she's going to teach you some coping mechanisms. She's going to teach you some scenic routes on that highway, some ways to do things differently. And you're like, oh, great, looking forward to all of that. But 2 to 3 months sounds awful. I can barely hang in there right now. And so she'll say, you know what? I'm going to refer you to the psychiatrist. So you are going to the psychiatrist, and he is going to meet with you maybe for 10 minutes. And he's going to say, here you go, pull out his prescription pad and write you a prescription. He's going to say, give these meds about 2 or 3 weeks, and you're going to start to feel better. Okay, better than 2 or 3 months. Thank you, psychiatrist. But still, come on, 2 and 3 weeks. I need help now. At the corner is the bar. You go in there, and the bartender says, give this shot 2 or 3 minutes, and you'll be feeling better. I'm taking the shot. I don't know about you, but the idea is we are seeking relief. We know that addiction becomes its own problem, but the origin of addiction is trauma. It's a response to trauma. The thing that happens yeah, jump in.
Quickly, Amy, I'm just gonna jump in here. Um, just a couple things from the chat, nothing, nothing revolutionary here. But Lucia asked, will this video be made available? This is such great stuff. Of course, the videos are always available on our website, worcesteraxe.org. I put the link in the chat as well for anybody curious there. This one will be up in the next couple days. And so I just wanted to just give us that reminder and that pause. If this is a lot and you're
It's so
learning a
much.
lot, it's there to come back to, right? We don't expect you to absorb it all in one sitting the first time around.
It's so much. It is heavy, it's intense, it's and I can really get, like, I'm so used to talking about it that it can be lost on me how wow that this can
Yeah.
be when you are just thinking about it. Um Initially, like, I've been thinking about this for years,
Yeah.
decades. Um and so and it still is super heavy and painful and sloggy. So please know that if you're feeling like, whoa, normal, that's our kind of normal. That's important.
Yeah.
Um, you think anything else before I pop
Folks,
back? Okay.
before you pop in, folks are saying thank you. Thank God. This is such great info. I want to watch this again and again, right? And so just recognizing that it does take some layers, some repeats. Like you said, you've been doing it for decades, right? And so um I love that we're also able to give this audience that space too.
Yeah.
Taking it at a pace that works. This is not a one time, you must absorb it all at once.
Oh gosh. And that's exactly why we started recording them and
Yep.
doing it this way. I mean, the pandemic, but also it's hard, it's dense, it's a lot of stuff. And it's like heavy. Um,
Yeah.
this slide, I know probably, I mean, I haven't really been able to look at the audience at all, but I assume that most people are my age or younger, and even kids today know about vinyl records, right? A vinyl record, when you got a skip in the vinyl record, you had two choices. If you knew that the skip was coming there, you could run over and pick up the needle, and you had to move the needle way past the skip, or else it would fall in. It literally would get sucked into the skip hole unless you went way around it. If you fell into the skip hole, it was like your stuff on repeat, the phrasing on repeat, party like it's 1999, 99, 99 on repeat, right? And that is exactly how trauma works. It causes this skip in the record of our brain, which means things quickly get sucked in and we're right in the repeat zone, or we're working so hard to stay away from that skip hole, right? Trauma symptoms are avoidance, staying so far away from that skip hole, or falling into it. Too little or too much. All of the symptoms relate to the trauma. It's really important to know too, like this really is science. It can feel with human beings, it can be hard to see that it is science, but what we mean by that is it is predictable. It happens to the majority. Um, Trauma is a predictable response to something extraordinarily stressful. It impacts all areas of your life and significantly affects the functioning and the quality of your relationships. So it's big stuff. What so I think the next slide we'll talk about it. All right. I'm going to go back to this. So I just want to give a little bit of an example about the too much or too little. And we will talk more about it, but if the trauma is money, say, if growing up in poverty, then kids may say, I'm going to do everything possible to make money. My whole life is going to become about making money because I don't want to fall in that poverty hole. So that extreme, or I'm just going to be in poverty. This is what it is. Like I'm all in, right? You don't get a freely chosen playing field. You are one, it's black or white. Somebody who didn't have that trauma has a whole huge range of options. When you have that trauma, you are one extreme or the other. You don't get it to be freely chosen. If you grew up with an alcoholic or addict parent, you are probably either struggling yourself or you completely avoid that. You're on the other side, you're a teetotaler. You didn't get to have a freely chosen relationship with substances. It was predetermined. That's what trauma does to you. It predetermines what your choices are going to be. This is nature and nurture. The sort of the nature refers to sort of the biological, sort genetic level, DNA level aspects of this. And nurture refers to family, experiences, bigger systems, culture. We always have had this idea, is it this or that, one or the other, but it's really both. It's near impossible to tease apart these things, but there's some really interesting new research on the implications of this. I have a long playlist too that I'm going to share on our website, and it's also on our YouTube channel, of all kinds of videos about specific uh, intergenerational trauma content. And one of them is about the Dutch hunger winter. Um, in Holland during the war, there was a lot of starvation, like food was hard to come by. And they found that and it wasn't for forever, it was for a fairly brief period of time, but women that were pregnant during that time, their children had significant mental health differences than people that hadn't been through that. They had a lot of difficulty, and that study showed us that trauma is passed in utero. Anything happening to your mom while she's pregnant is impacting the developing fetus. So wow, right? Before you're born. This is taking us back to even before you're born. Things are impacting you as an individual. We know that historical trauma is going to set sort of the set design, the impact. Our whole culture is grounded in historical trauma. There's a big body of literature. Actually, there's a book called Post Traumatic Slavery Syndrome. And it's really looking at, if you were in slavery, if you were an enslaved person, what are the consequences of that? And what are the consequences of that on your children and on your children's children? And believe me, there are clear consequences. Another place where we've learned about this and studied this is the Holocaust. There's a huge group of like Jewish children of Holocaust survivors that are one of the most studied groups of all time, because we saw that they were struggling and having problems, even though they didn't themselves experience it. And that led to studying that this is real. They really did have much more instances of mental health issues than people that didn't have that genetic background. This is secondary trauma, vicarious trauma, sort of hearing about what happened to a parent or a grandparent. It's going to impact you. It's going to impact your worldview. It's going to impact your belief in whether you're safe or not in the world. And it's going to interfere with your ability to bond with your parent or caretaker. We know in adoption, just it taking someone away from their primary attachment is trauma in and of itself. Everything that comes after is like the primary wound. Like this is, we're starting with trauma before we even get here. Um, the most mind-blowing study for me about passed down trauma was the study that they did at Emory University, this mouse smell study. They took mice, and we always are studying mice because they are genetically pretty compatible with people. They have a lot of similarities, but they also have quick generations, right? Their lifespan is much shorter. So they took this group of mice and they paired the smell of acetone with an electric shock on their feet. So pretty quickly, and behaviorism, that's like a whole other thing that I even thought about including in here, because that impacts all of this as well. But very quickly, the shock and the smell got paired for the mice, and they recognized that when they smelled that smell, something bad was coming. So of course they responded every time they smelled it. The next generation, their pups, without having been shocked, when they smelled that smell, they had that same response. We looked, and this trauma had altered their genetic markers and had even altered their like they had more smell receptors because of it. So at a genetic DNA level, trauma, like your body, your brain, yourself is like, I need to know certain things. What am I going to need to know? And it passes that down. The grandchildren of those mice were still impacted. This blew my mind because I could understand that if I were growing up with my mom and she experienced trauma and she had those behaviors and ways of being and fears, I was going to learn that. That was getting passed down. I got that that was a way that intergenerational trauma worked. But with this study, you don't need any contact with the person that experienced the trauma to have the impact. Grandchild generation. So things that happen to a grandparent that you never met, that you know nothing about, can be impactful at the DNA genetic level. Mind blowing. American culture um, is a piece of this. It's important to talk about. Our culture was built on colonialism. We came, people, ancestors of those of us that identify as white, Caucasian, European, ancestors came here to a place that was already settled and made ourselves at home. Not only did we make ourselves at home, we believed it was our divine right to do so. And we did that because might is right. We had the strength, we had the capacity, we had the technology. beyond what people that were already here had, and we use that to give ourselves advantage over. That's the history of our country. Yet we pretend that it isn't, that it's a blank slate, that every single person who arrives here in the world is a blank slate or tabula rasa, just waiting to be filled up with information and experiences. So not true. We have this myth of meritocracy in our culture. And what that means is that we believe that the people that are ahead, that get ahead, have gotten there by their own merit, that every person stands on their own. This sort of fierce individualism idea in our culture that if you are at the top, you deserve to be there, you got there by your own hard work. We don't take into account things like if you have a lot of advantages, that is going to make a difference. We allowed Jeb Bush to say when he was thinking about a presidential run that he was a self made man, despite the fact that he grew up in the White House. I think that might have make a difference in your life, right? So American culture really conspires to keep generational trauma in place with this myth that how you're born, where you're born, who you're born to, none of that matters. We still all have an equal shot of it. That is absolute bullshit. I put this Malcolm Gladwell quote there too, because it's a little bit more positive than how I just said it. But no one, not rock stars, professional athletes, software billionaires, not even geniuses ever makes it alone, right? So this idea that we should, so if you've been beating yourself up at all about your level of success, please do not. Um, this stuff is rarely talked about and rarely seen. We have this invisibility factor that comes with privilege because the people that have power really benefit from the narrative that they deserve it and that they got there fairly. So we're not even allowed to talk about it or point it out because, wow, that would be problematic. One place where this shows up more than anywhere else, so transparently, so clearly, is racism.
Before we dive into racism, Amy, I got a couple comments.
Yeah,
The
please.
first one was coming from the record and needing to go far enough in advance and from that slide, and the thought came through in the chat. Wow, yes, the thought loops. Like
The thought loops.
the thought loops, right? Oh
That's
yeah.
what it is. It's what do you call
Yep.
that? Remuneration. I can't think of the right word, but where you
I
just
don't know
can't
either.
stop, right? Like you
Yeah.
rumination, that's it. Ruminate.
Rumination. Yep. When it's
You
so cyclical. Yep.
It's so cyclical. And of course the rumination is happening, right? And if you're not talking about it, it's still going all the time. You're thinking about this stuff, but you're
Yep.
not telling anybody. And if it's all you can think about, like that's going to show up in your
Yeah.
behavior, right? When I was a MSW student, I could not understand play therapy and how could this possibly work? How are you ever going to find out what's going on with a kid from how they're playing? That didn't make any sense to me until I learned a lot about trauma. And now what I know is they can't help, but if it's constantly on their mind, they're going to play like that. They're like they can't not do the
Yeah.
thing that they're thinking about. And that's us too, right? Like we can work really hard to avoid it. Um, but that's impactful too. That's like causing part of the other side of it, right? Does
Yeah.
that make sense? That's making sense, okay?
It's making a lot of sense, and it's just bringing so much awareness. I saw there's another comment here um, that says, I keep flashing back to my hoarding clients and to incarcerated youth I worked with, so many points on trauma related to both, right? And that's what you're really saying. Like, yeah, we can experience it as adults, but we also know it's true in kids, and these are the cycles and the patterns, and this is how it shows up, right? Um,
I'm glad that those connections
yeah,
are being made too, because that's where we started. Like the youth that we were trying to help, like they didn't have a shot at it. Like they were already the situation was already out of hand, right? Like because of our culture and what was happening and what the lies we tell about our culture. And
Absolutely.
the lies we tell about our culture, racism is one of the biggest ones. And racism is the record thing, because if you're a person of color, you have probably been already told a bunch of times that, like, stop thinking about racism. It's not all about racism. Everything isn't racism. Play in the race card, right? Because it's your content. So you're in the remuneration. You're in the that. I'm sorry that I keep forgetting that word, but you're in the loop. You're stuck in the trauma, the wound. People that aren't people of color get to pick avoidance as their coping mechanism around racism, right? So white people are trying to legislate not talking about racism. They don't want it talked about in classrooms. They don't think we should even talk about it. If that's not a trauma response, I don't know what is, right? The problem is most people aren't getting to pick whether they want to go in avoidance or arousal, but our whole culture is responding to trauma. Racism is a social determinant of health, mental health, and well being that has a profound impact on children, adolescents, young adults, and their families. Exposure to racism as a target, a witness, or an unwilling participant is traumatic. The response is the same: fight, flight, freeze, stress response, hormones leading to inflammation. Racism creates moral injury. It's a trauma. Like all other traumas, there's a dose response. The more you're in it, the more you're seeing it, the more it's going to impact you. In 2019, which, pretty recent, the American Academy of Pediatrics added experiencing racism to the list of recognized ACEs. So finally, at least there's some recognition that this is a problem. We can't solve a problem that we can't talk about. And we've had a long history of people in control saying, we can't even talk about this one. Racism is a good example to look at, because we can see that this is happening at multiple levels. Like, it's way bigger than the one individual person. But yet that is usually what we're taught about racism, right? That it's individual stuff, it's your own personal beliefs and prejudices, ideas. And we are actually usually taught that it's interpersonal, that racism shows up when one person is mean or abusive to another person around race, right? So we get that interpersonal thing, but it's people make up institutions, the people in power that get to define how we're going to talk about it, what we're going to talk about it, when we're going to talk about it, are heading all the institutions. So racism is institutional. It's discriminatory treatment, policies, practices within organizations and institutions. All of these institutions come together to create our whole structure. Structural racism is a system in which public policies, institutional practices, and other norms perpetuate racial group inequality. So we can see that here's this trauma impacting everything: personal, interpersonal, systems, settings, culture. Pretty clear way to see this is all trauma. Family systems. So for this is probably the level that many of us recognize we've been impacted by this at.
Amy, quickly, I know you said you had a lot of slides. Do you have a slide on this?
On
To share?
on
Share
which one?
screen? We're not seeing slides right now.
Oh, you're kidding me.
Nope. I thought you had them, so we just gotta
I'm seeing the slides. This is Kathy.
Oh, Kathy, you can see them. Okay, maybe it's just me.
Maybe it's
I'm
just
seeing them.
Everybody's seeing them. Perfect. You're good to keep going. Sorry about that.
all right. That's okay. I know, Kelsey, it's hard with the views of Zoom and all that stuff. So, but thanks for jumping in, and jump in if something comes up, please.
Yeah, and I've got them back on mine. Sorry for that.
That's okay. Nobody needs to tell you, families are the primary influence in our lives. History tends to repeat itself. We've seen the reasons why. Families move horizontally and vertically. So there's things that happen at that same generational level in a family, and there's things that came before and things that will come after. Family systems theory comes from Murray Bowen in the 50s. And really the big value of this is this idea that we can't really look at a person without looking at the systems that they're in. That earlier racism slide had the fish in the fishbowl, because that's often one of the things that we use to talk about this. You can't really separate those things. It's the environment we're in. um, each individual is impacted by their family, and they're trying to be connected and apart from. That's sort of what we do as humans. So the trauma content going on in our family is going to want us to either like separate or get sucked in. Systems develop typical ways of being that are reliable and predictable. There might be things like we don't talk about this in our family. And all of those things impact each other. So again, you can see that your individual experience is just one piece of the puzzle. Everything else that's going on is also impacting you. This picture about social determinants of health really, I think, shows how many pieces are in this puzzle, how many parts come together to create this sort of culture we're in that allows for all of this stuff happening. One of the main pieces of family systems theory is this idea that families are always going for homeostasis or equilibrium. Again, it applies to individuals, families, groups, our whole culture. We want things to stay exactly as they are. The default is things being as they are, staying the same. So without there's a pull from the system not to change, but to continue functioning as they always have been. That's why you're hearing things like, let's not talk about it, just keep going, this has always worked, this is the way we've always done it. You try to pull the mobile pictures here because it does show that sort of how this works. I could pull one of those circles in there and it would send the whole thing like into a little bit of chaos, right? But then it's going to settle back to right where it was. That's the pull of families, groups, cultures. They might get destabilized by some new information or a new way of doing things, but they're always going to try to reset to the way things were. So that means we have to work really hard to not let things go back to the way they were, and to let yourself off the hook when things go back to the way they are. It's science. The issues of the parent are going to get passed on to the child. The patterns that we all develop come from a purpose. We develop these patterns because we're in avoidance or in arousal. We're trying to cope with something. And when we don't even see the pattern, when they're unexamined, they just kind of keep on going, even if they're not working for you. And the unseenness of this is a really huge, I hope, piece to take away. Because like, as I've said a bunch, this is what I do. I've been doing it a long time. It's like all I do, and I still don't see so many of these pieces in my own life. I always find it much easier to see other people's patterns, other people's issues than my own. And I think that's all of us. And that's part of why therapy can be valuable, is somebody else might be able to see things you don't see, because the you not seeing it is part of it. It's the normal thing. It's all of it. So again, if you're seeing stuff for the first time, not surprising. Some of the patterns that develop in addiction, right, are the lack of safety and predictability. An addict is at baseline pretty unstable. So a kid learns that the environment is unstable. Basic needs go unmet, excessive worry, issues with authority, people pleasing as a survival strategy, neglect, Hypervigilance, meaning obsessively paying attention to what's going on with the parent. Um, Parentified child. This is especially common for girls and for oldest children, where the child decides that they're going to have to take on the responsibilities of the parent. They become the parent. Patterns in physical abuse. If physical abuse was the trauma, there's going to be some preoccupations with power and control, fear and mistrust. People that have been physically abused, a lot of times at baseline, are on edge. They're already hypervigilant. And then when something happens, they're going to have a really big startle response. You see this with veterans. You're going to have issues with authority. I have often joked that I fight authority, authority always wins is my theme song. And this is why when the perpetrator of abuse is a person in authority, you're going to have issues with all people in authority. It's just part of the pattern. This person, because power and control, they may themselves bully smaller kids, younger kids. They may have been taught to lie about their injuries, about what's going on. Whoops, didn't mean to slip so fast. Um, they often need to really be good and right and perfect because they decided that that would keep them safe from being abused. And they have insecure attachment. It's pretty hard to attach to a person who's hurting you. You can't feel safe and secure ever in that attachment. Patterns in sexual abuse. If you are sexually abused, a lack of boundaries, meaning not knowing what you can say yes to, what you can't say yes to, where not having the ability to have agency about your own, about anything really. Hygiene needs can go unmet. You're going to absolutely develop an inability to trust or to feel safe because trauma relationships are going to either be are going to be sexualized, right? Everything. If sexual abuse is your trauma content, everything is going to be seen through that lens of being sexualized, and people will be either very, very sexy, or they may do the opposite and be very like, stay away from me, non-gendered, like overweight, don't stay, leave me alone. Um, a victim and a perpetrator lens can develop. And that happens in many forms of abuse that you have only known. Either if you've known victimization, you begin to see things like, I'm either going to be a victim or I'm going to be a perpetrator, and you don't have more choices. In sexual abuse, the attention given is really uneven. You're either getting intense attention or none. And there's not a lot of in betweens for people that have experienced this. And that leads to a lot of confusion about relationships and love and sex and identity. It leads to trauma bonds. It leads to people, when you're stuck in this cycle, the bonds are really hard to break. They have much more power and intensity than we want them to have. So probably for many of you, you know that this is some of the stuff that your family has inherited, encountered. Um, it can be useful to really start to think about this for yourself, and in a way that's safe. And I didn't really say it before, and I didn't even have a slide about it. But timing and dosage is the thing. My very first clinical internship, my supervisor was always like, timing and dosage, meaning when are you doing this? Like, and how much are you doing this? Working on this stuff is so important. Healing yourself is super, super important work, but you got to do it in a way that feels safe and good. If you're overloading yourself, it's not going to be useful. So and sometimes this family tree thing can be a more detached way too, to sort of look at it and think about it, put it on paper. There's templates all over the internet on how to do a family tree. but it's useful to sort of think about. And this is your family tree, not to like discover your genetic identity, although we know that that's a whole thing too, but more to look specifically at what happened in your family and what some of those patterns may have been that that were operating, but that you didn't necessarily know about. Um, Ask family members for help if you can, if needed, but you're going to want to look for patterns and striking events. I know when I did this, I found out that my great grandmother, her, her mother died in childbirth, right? I wouldn't have known that otherwise. No one spoke of it. It was not passed down information, but I learned it from looking here. And it really made me like it really, that wow, of course that made a huge difference in her life experience. My great grandmother had schizophrenia, so obviously that's incredible challenges with your mental health. And to learn that she came into the world, um, and at the same time her mother was leaving the world, is a pretty significant trauma to come into the world with. It's not hugely surprising that she had such dramatic mental health problems. When anytime you're seeing young deaths, illnesses, addictions, alternative lifestyles, any of those things can contribute to your own what was normed for you, what the patterns are going to be for you. So what helps is getting to like sort of uncovering it, making sense of it, getting to the bottom of it. Um, But that also means taking good care of yourself. This is super hard and painful. Um, and the healing is huge. It's invaluable, but it's hard to get to if you're not really vigilantly taking care of yourself. Healing happens together when we look at this stuff and we talk about this stuff, and we can do it in space where we know we're going to be seen and supported and believed and cared about. That to me is so much more powerful. I've often sort of the social work training really sets you up to be a therapist, an individual therapist. And I've done that at times. But what I don't like about that is that I feel like that buys into the narrative that this is about an individual. Um, we all are individuals and we can benefit from better coping skills and all of this stuff. But I think it's so important for us to see that this is not an us problem. This is so much bigger. And when you work collectively in groups with other people and you hear their stories as similar to yours, it really helps you be able to see this bigger picture. It really helps you to see that there's nothing wrong with you. It helps you to see that the way you are makes perfect sense with what was set up for you. Anytime you're doing anything to reduce your own stress is a bonus. Um, so taking things off your plate if you can, um, getting help, reducing your stress level is huge. That was such a big thing. I worked at the Department of Mental Health for a long time, and people that were served there had such a high baseline of stress that one thing happening would like send them over the edge. Their phone getting shut off, would they'd be in the hospital because their baseline stress was already so high. So things you can do to reduce your stress will definitely benefit you. This whole mindfulness topic can be a huge, um like it's its own talk, and actually it's been a couple of talks here at Trauma Training Tuesday, because it's really helpful and really important. But when you've grown up in trauma, I know for myself, I have always been trying to do mindfulness stuff. I think I did my first Buddhist silent retreat when I was in my early 20s. And I've been doing all that stuff ever since and finding it helpful, but a struggle. And I only really recently had the recognition that I'd been spending so much of my childhood trying to not be in the moment. that this idea of being in the moment was kind of scary, kind of not exactly what I was trained to do by my own experiences. Um, so it's but when you can be in the moment, that is really helpful. Trauma content, like the sort of the loop of trauma makes you feel like it's happening right now. You feel like you're in it. People that have been traumatized have a sense that they're in danger at the moment. And so sort of my mindfulness tools helped me with that. I developed this mantra of nothing bad is happening right now. I had to kind of continually remind myself that in this moment here, I was safe. I'm okay. I have a roof over my head. I have what I need. There's not an impending sense of doom. I can see it around me. But that's a conscious thing that I have to do, is to be in the present moment. Sleep is one of the most underestimated, like, superpowers. Um, every single mental illness, right there with talking about normal, they also talk about it's pretty likely to impact your eating and your sleeping. Eating and sleeping are like the first things to go all the time. So when you can get a hold of those things, that's the absolute best thing you can do for yourself. Regular rest, regular healthy food, that is going to set you on a better path right out of the gate. EMDR has had incredible results for people. Eye movement desensitization response. I'm not sure if I have that right, but on the other side, there's not too many more slides left, so we should have a good chunk of time to talk about stuff. And I know that people that are here today have had their own individual great experiences with EMDR. Um, what they are doing is going through your trauma content and trying to reestablish different brain pathways and take the power away from that sort of super highway you had in your brain. And it's having really great results. I didn't put it on here, but I should have. Similar to EMDR is tapping, or emotional freedom technique, EFT, and it's doing a similar thing to EMDR. We also had a trauma training Tuesday on tapping, but it's another technique that helps sort of take the amp down your trauma content, sort of make it less powerful and dramatic by giving you different stimuli at the same time. Psychedelic medicine, all of the plant medicines have had incredible results with trauma, better than almost anything else. They have Psychedelic medicines have been illegal for a couple decades now, but they have been doing the research to get them back online as a tool in our toolbox. And the research is so promising. People have had incredible success with psychedelic medicine. A lot of times, people who have used it describe getting a much bigger picture of everything in the world, and their generational trauma is sort of the in a different sort of alongside of, they see it very differently. The thing that we most often do, that we're kind of doing as just by being here, is processing it. And that's the work that therapy does with you, this sort of looking at it, making sense of it, going there just in a dose you can handle about the feelings around it, thinking about what must that have been like when you were a kid, um, using it as a source of empathy and understanding. And again, recognizing, like, don't oversaturate yourself. Just do enough that you can move along. I know crying visits your life a lot when you have trauma, and I believe it's healing and helpful. But we all know if you're crying all day, every day, not okay. So sort of using that timing and dosage strategy, let yourself cry, let yourself do that, but not all day, right? Trying to push yourself to, okay, I'm going to allow that, but you want to develop a middle ground with this stuff, not an all or nothing. right? And so working with it in this sort of timing and dosage way of thinking about it is what's going to help you come to a healthier middle ground, a healthier normal.
Absolutely. I've got a comment in the chat here from Kathy. Due to medical issues, I sleep 3.5 to 5.5 hours a night. It's so tough. And honestly, doctors and many people don't see it as a real issue. We know that's true, right?
Whoa.
We know that medical systems don't always support overall health or general health. They look at specific pieces of the problem, but they're not seeing the trauma piece, the mental health piece, and a more holistic picture sometimes.
There's so much like science and research about that. That's also fairly new too. I saw the sleep expert. It was a podcast. I can't think of it, but if I find it, I'll send it to Kathy. Um, and he said, you know, the adage "time heals all wounds." That's not the truth. He's like, sleep heals all wounds. Sleep heals all
Wow.
wounds. Like when
Yeah.
you're sleeping, I really think like your brain is trying to put stuff together. It's like trying to reorg when you sleep.
Yeah.
And if you're not sleeping, you're going to be like scrambled and scattered. It really is. And I'm glad that you get that, Kathy, because it's the number, I would say that's the most important thing
That's
for
called
anything
brainstorming.
to get a hand of. Yes. Anything else? There is only a few more slides left, and then we will have enough time to talk at the end, I'm glad to say.
Oh my God. Give them more time to talk. Give them
Yes.
more time to talk.
Yeah, so I just talked about that, the importance of sleep. Awareness, education, and insight. Again, recognizing that your attention is like where all your power is. What are you paying attention to? What are you going to look at it? And how long are you gonna, right? So you're using your attention for timing and dosage. Paying attention is one of the absolute best things you can do. It's also important to learn from good sources. Like it's really, I feel so grateful to live in the YouTube world now where I can have access to so much expert thinking, so much good stuff that I can learn from, and I can do it at my own convenience when I want to from the comfort of my own home. Um, so do that. We are trying to cultivate resources at Worcester Addresses Childhood Trauma. The Each Trauma Training Tuesday page, there's a page for each Trauma Training Tuesday. So the recording is there, and then some other resources are there because we want people to be able to find useful, good resources when they're faced with this trauma content. We know we want you to have solutions too. We don't want to just be like, here's all the problems. Good luck to you. Seeing all the problems is important and it's the first step and it's a big deal.
Right.
But we don't want to leave you there because, ouch, it's painful. So we're always wanting to make sure that we're thinking about what helps and helping people get access to that. I think I went too fast. And again, insight, that's why we're doing this. When you realize what's happening, you now have so many more ways to cope with it than when you don't even know what's going on, when you don't know, why do I feel this way? Why am I like this? Why is it like this? That does not feel powerful. That's not a place of agency. But as you learn and understand, that's what's going to lead to mental health success. And self-compassion, self-care. My good friend Sandy Ellis always like reminds me, like, I'm an expert in this and I didn't see my own stuff. I do this all the time and I still am struggling a lot of the time, right? So have compassion for yourself. Like if I do this all day every day and I'm still not as far along as I would like to, don't expect yourself to sort of have be further than you are. having that compassion and that caring, treating yourself the way you'd treat a friend. Some sort of the mental health part of it is like all of this trauma is our self-talk, right? It becomes our self-talk can be like, you don't deserve good things. You're not worth it anyways. You're going to screw this one up again, right? But when we got to interrupt those thoughts and choose a different thought and recognize that's not real. That's what I learned from somebody who was traumatized and pass that along to me, right? Um, and sort of I have this glimmer piece here, and that it relates to this idea of attention, using your attention on to put your attention on something lovely and beautiful and happy. We kind of all know about triggers, and glimmers are the opposite, right? When we get a trigger, it brings us right into that bad stuff, right in the trauma content, right as if it's happening again. We're re-triggered. Intentionally looking for the happy, the beautiful, finding the joy intentionally and squeezing the juice out of it is what we need to do for ourselves. Taking these tiny moments of awe for joy and inner calm, that is going to help our mood shift. It's going to send cues to our nervous system that we're okay and that we're safe. If we can get some sort of contentment and ease and sort of downregulate our stress response, our body responds with positive energy. We can feel hopeful that no matter how bad things can feel, we can pet our dog or find or look at a beautiful painting. Those finding the good, finding the joy, that's the best thing we can do for our well-being. Embracing all of the glimmers to sort of create a more beautiful world. This link is the link to my intergenerational trauma playlist. And I know you probably, I don't know if you can pull the link off the slide, but I'll add it into the chat on the other side, or maybe Kelsey can. And we'll also post it on the Worcester Dresses Childhood Trauma website. So you can keep on learning more. And that is what's going to lead to healing. You're doing your work is stopping the cycle. And we know that these cycles perpetuate because we didn't we didn't look at it. We didn't think about it. We were on autopilot. But when we're not on autopilot and we stop and we think and we examine, we can choose a different way. And that is going to keep it from being passed down again and again and again. So our healing has a generational impacts. It's going to impact people all around us, people behind us. Brene Brown is the one who has this idea about making generous assumptions. And the generous assumption is the idea that everybody is doing the best they can, yourself included, right? And one of the gifts, I think, of learning about generational trauma has been for me is to have a little bit more empathy and be able to make generous assumptions about the people that went before me, the recognition that they really were doing the best they could with what they got handed, what was passed down to them. It doesn't excuse when people are harmful and abusive to you, but it helps you understand it and make sense of it. And that can help you also be kinder to yourself, right? You are doing the best you can. You deserve love. One of the also awesome things is getting a hug will help you regulate, will bring your nervous system into calm. You can do that for yourself too. Giving yourself a hug can really help you in the moment when you're under stress and distress. Here's another Brene. When we deny our stories, they define us. I would add, when we don't know our stories, they define us. When we own our stories, we get to write the ending. That's why we're doing this. Again, there's lots of great resources out there on this work. We'll share some of these on the landing page, and as well as the playlists and some of this other stuff. And that is it. Ta-da! Done. Time left. Half hour left to talk about it. If you have a smartphone and you can do that, if you would not mind giving us a little bit of feedback, that is really helpful for our funders. They're always frustrated that we don't have any data to show that this is helpful to people. So doing it really helps us keep on going. End of slideshow. Yay, let's talk. How are you guys doing? So much.
I just quickly put the feedback link in the chat so folks can access that.
Thank you.
Amy, also, do you know the title or the name on YouTube of the playlist you wanted to share?
Intergenerational trauma.
Intergenerational trauma. Okay, looking for that one.
I can, if anybody wants to jump in, please, we have, a 30 minutes now. Like that was so much stuff and so much information, and maybe you're feeling too overwhelmed to talk about it. But if not, I would love to hear, and whilst I'll look for that, post that link while somebody's talking. Go ahead, Barb.
Okay. I hope I can put this together after that incredible presentation that you gave. I wanted to say that I so appreciate this presentation. And if at the end, if you have a chance to explain again how we can give specific feedback to your funders, um, this was a lot of information in a short amount of time, but the way you presented it, I have been to a lot of trauma workshops. I did the year long with Bessel Vanderkook. I've gone to other week-long trainings with JRI. I have never heard anybody put it together in the way that you did, where you not only looked I've never heard the larger systemic piece put together. I really appreciated the part on racism, colonialism, what our culture is doing in terms of trauma. Embedding it in this presentation was very powerful. And I also like the way that you were so open and intertwined your own trauma history and just acknowledging it and recognizing how very difficult it is. I could very much relate to all of that. As mental health professionals, we all know there's a greater rate of trauma amongst us. Bringing awareness to us, paralleling your own awareness and how difficult it is and how it's, I don't know what to say. I find it almost, having worked on my own for years as well, it's nearly impossible to at all times fully recognize the impact on yourself. And I also like the way you just embedded so much in this. I don't really even know where to, I hope I'm expressing what I was experiencing while I was watching it. Yeah,
I really appreciate that.
I think it was
Barb.
really extraordinary the way you presented it with all the different pieces. I also really liked your analogies. The nesting cup, I've never seen that before. I'm certainly going to use that in my own work with clients, but it's also a good image for me, for myself. And, so I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. I mean, that I've learned stuff from you. We've had the benefit of knowing each other and sort of talking about this stuff, and I've learned a lot from you. And it is sort of this ever learning process. We can never have this all figured out. And I'm glad that the systems pieces landed, because more and more I'm feeling like, wow, this whole environment, like victim blaming is like the order of the day in our culture. Like, we're going to hurt you, and then because you're hurt, we're going to use that as a reason to hurt you more or to discount you, And like, wow, we see that play out. And I feel like when I started, I've been doing anti-racism work for a really long time, but when I started framing it as trauma and seeing it as trauma, that really helped me even more understand how impactful and what needs to be done, and how like, and people feel, it seems like people can talk about it in a as trauma without being triggered, in the way that when we just talk about racism, people immediately go to their trigger. Yeah, let's not talk about it, or oh, here we go. And that's not helpful, right? So that putting into practice that idea of amping our own activation down if we want to talk about this stuff. Oh, I see a hand up. Great. Is it German? Is that how you pronounce your name? Thank you for being here.
Hi, it's Amy. I want to tell you that what you said about trauma. I come from a trauma family. In my family, we were 10 kids in the house, and my parents brought us up to all of us. But you know how it is bringing 10 kids in the house. My mom, just to raise us, she used to abuse us, you know, and I was abused as a child. And when I grew up, I I was seeing the pattern with my kids, and I noticed. I said to myself, "What am I doing? I'm doing to them what they did to me."
Mm.
So I broke that cycle. I broke the cycle because I don't want to. Now that my mom is gone, um, I see what she went through with her 10 kids, but there's no reason for that abuse. There was no reason, because she used to beat me with an extension cord folded in four. Okay. And now I'm older. I have two kids, and my kids could say now that I was a good mom, that I never touched them, I never hit them. And another thing that I want to tell you is what you were saying about addicts and learning how to cope and learning how to live day by day. Um, I'm a recovery addict. I've been clean for 8 years, and I did it day by day, but with the help of God, you know. And I pray every day, and I thank God every day that I'm clean and that I'm doing good. And sometimes you have to take it into your own hands, because I didn't want to keep on falling deeper and deeper and deeper. I wanted to be up, take care of, like you said, take care of yourself, maintain yourself. Now I live a happy life, you know, and I take care of myself, and I treat myself.
That is so beautiful. I so appreciate what you said, and like what you said had so much resonance, and right, like that when we see it, we can do something with it. It's so unseen, right? Like what your experience in your family is, and then you automatically just think, without awareness and intention, of course you're going to do the same thing with your kids that was done with you. That's what
Yeah,
you learned. How do you know different? You don't know different. But
right,
you went to your own, you used your own experience and said, I don't want that for my kids. And your awareness of it, like, you got you into recovery. And right, like, we know, especially in the world of addiction and recovery, we know that not seeing the problem, pretending there's not a problem, is the problem.
that's right,
Like, you really need to see it and get it before you, if you don't see that you have a problem, you're obviously not going
and
to be
that's right.
working on it.
If you don't, yeah, right,
So it really, and your courage to make the unseen seen and to look at it, and the fact that you worked with that and have a better life. And you can
Yes.
see that your work is giving your kids
It's
better
pain.
outcomes than you had.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's incredible and powerful. And I'm
Yes, it
super
is.
glad to hear about that and so grateful that you shared that and for what you did because we're all in this community together. So when my kids are healthier and your kids are healthy, all of our families are healthier. It's good for all of us. There's
Now I
so
see
many
the
forces
addict.
on the other side.
Now I see the addicts in the street, and I look at them and I feel sorry. Sometimes I would like to talk to them and tell them my story. And how I got out.
I
See if
think
I could
that
get
would be
them out.
amazing.
I
That would
know,
be awesome. And I love on it, like, and that's so powerful. Like, that's my hope is that we have empathy instead of cruelty and judgment. People that
right?
are like, they're not,
It's
nobody says,
it's
I want to
not
be an
easy.
addict. They're
It's
doing
not
it
easy.
to
It's
escape.
not easy. Yes,
Exactly. And we should have empathy and like we're starting out with the gang kids. Like, let's stop
right,
punishing them and help them. Give them something different. Give them support. Give their mom support. Give their dad support. We recognized with that we needed a two generation intervention if we wanted to change things.
right.
Just doing one or the you need to do this work with you're
With
like
the help.
with people
Yes,
in the
yes,
context.
yes. Really, I'm proud of myself
You
of
should be.
I have accomplished.
There's nothing more powerful and nothing more difficult. And hell yeah, you should be proud of yourself. I'm proud of you. We are all
Thank,
proud. That is,
thank you,
it's huge.
thank you.
And the default is to just keep on doing what you've been doing. Just keep on.
Yes.
It takes, and we say it's a default because it really does take attention, concerted effort, and focus to move
You
it.
know what I do? What I say? I say that was my old life. God gave me a new life from here on.
Beautiful. And I hope that new life just keeps getting better.
Oh
And it
yes.
sounds like you're even
Oh yes.
using it to keep helping people.
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else have a hand up or want to say anything about any insights they might have gotten or landed, anything that landed differently? I know some of the people here have seen me present so many times. But hopefully there's some good new stuff in there.
Yeah.
Always good stuff, Amy, right?
Right.
I just keep sitting with it, like as to improve my own empathy, right? And also, yeah, really cultivating more understanding, more peace, less stress in my day-to-day work, in my professional work. Folks will say all the time, like, we want to impact this generational trauma, but a lot of harm has already been done. And so what do we do as a family to undo the harm, move forward, that kind of stuff? And it's really tough, right? Like each new generation is a new time to get a fresh start in a lot of ways, but we also have to do the work of healing currently with the people that
Inside.
exist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Agree. It really is our whole culture just like pretends that this isn't happening or isn't real or isn't and I'm just glad the more people that begin when you begin to see it this way too, it really helps you feel like maybe you can do something with it. And the more people that see it for what it is and call out the nonsense that like the harm our culture does with this pull yourself up by your bootstrap nonsense, like we
Mm-hmm.
all have an equal shot at it.
Yep.
Like, come on, that's just not true.
Nope. Nope. Mm-mm.
Anyone else have thoughts or questions or things that they were thinking of or now that I have, like, if there's like 15 minutes still, I could have gone slow. I was like, but I got to get all this information. Um, but it's hopefully it
What are you doing up there?
and again, it you'll think more about it and different things will land. You'll be like, wow, I didn't think of this, and maybe this is what's going on. It really is right. It's a lot. Kathy, I'm looking at the chat now too, just to see what I might have missed, and I do appreciate people that talked about seeing this with Kathy, you know too, like it's always easier to see other people's stuff. Like when you are there, you can see like what's going on for other people, but much harder to see your own stuff.
Uh-huh.
I loved,
Hi,
and I
Amy.
loved
Oh,
it
sorry.
when you
Go
said
ahead,
that.
jump in.
Yeah, sorry for not being on video. I'm tired.
Fine.
Um, you know what I look like. A few people here do.
Me too.
Yeah, no, I definitely see. It's been helpful. I've actually been going through a trauma weekly, or no, twice a month, I think. Um, in Boston, I was talking to Kelsey about maybe we should bring it into Worcester. But it's basically like everyone comes and just does like 2 or 3 minutes, they share about what's going on in their life, and it's really about people witnessing, and so I've been doing that, and it's been really beneficial for me, and just it's just nice. People are all in different spots, and so anyway, I've been doing that, and I actually just took that same people who run that. It's out of a church in Boston. They also did a class on collective trauma, understanding collective trauma, and that's been really
Oh, that
incredible
sounds
because I
great.
think that for it's just, and we've been reading Bessel's book, The Body Keeps Score, and then we've been reading Grandmother's Hands. I think it's My Grandmother's Hands
Mm,
or something like that, and
yeah.
that's also a really good book because that talks about um, just transmitted harm, trauma, and actually the trauma of all races in different ways it comes out. I wasn't expecting that book to talk about that, but yeah, I've been recently having trauma. If I can be honest, at one point I'm deaf in one ear, and once in a while, at one point I lost hearing in the other ear, and they didn't know if it was going to come back. Um, they were a mass sign ear. And so I went through a period where I was asking people to turn on closed captioning, and people wouldn't. And I'm like, that's my lifeline. So, and now the hearing came back in my other ear. Um, but I recently had a thing where I turned on closed captioning, and or in some meeting, and some woman goes, "What's that?" And she lost her mind, I guess, because Zoom said someone could take it, do a transcript of it, and save it, and she just like really got stuck on that, and I lost my mind and got angry, and I thought to myself, why did I get so angry? And I realized one of the reasons was because I learned when I was advocating for myself, when I really couldn't hear. This time I was doing it just because my computer was freezing and the closed captions would continue even if people froze. I learned that being nice, you didn't actually get listened to. It became more of a dialogue. And I don't know if that's probably, I wonder if that's true for other people, like in certain situations. It becomes too much of a dialogue. I've got to like address everyone's concerns. And I don't have a problem. Listen, we can work with the organizer to make sure that no one can save the transcript. I have no problem with that. But it really became, when it became about her thing, I was like, no, this is tiring. Like this is, too tiring to advocate. So anyway, I just wanted to share that, like, this sort of experience of like, I could be nice, but my body said it's not. Well, it sounds weird to say. My body said it's not safe to stay nice in this situation because if you do, it becomes a negotiation. Because I've had that happen a few times. So, someone said I can't turn closed caption on because people we name chemicals, and I'm like, yes, and in Zoom you can spell a chemical out, and Zoom will go letter by letter. So if you have to, you know what I mean? So it's like everything else is addressable, but people don't come at it like that. People come at it like it's exactly equal. Like, no, we're worried
Right.
about this.
And it's about power too. Like even just in your small example, the person who's running the thing has the power to decide if they're going to accommodate you or not. And you're having to have agency for yourself to ask for that. It's not the default. We don't just, and we should just default to let's do whatever works for people, right? Like it just speaks to how much this is all about power too. And yeah,
Well, well, my grandmother's hands talks about, they talk about the idea that like a white body is normal, like and then the
oh
black body
yeah,
is like judged by that, or like, like it strikes me when, and that really struck me when he said that, like, what are we assuming in situations is the norm, and what are we assuming is, it
right.
just was
But
interesting.
it's norm to whoever wrote the book, right? And in DSM, that's probably a lot of educated white men. What they're talking
No, the
about
book,
normal, they're talking about their norm.
yeah, no, just to back up, the author is a black man, and grandmother's hands is actually his mother was picking cotton. Her grandmother was picking cotton, so it's really, but he's talking about how like racism comes out in that way, like the whether it's disabled people or a person who's black, it's sort of like they're judged by the big big standard of, you know like when we get into things like merit and thinking things are based on merit, and it's like, well, we make
Yeah,
things
that one
harder for
frosts me the
certain
most, right? The other big cultural myth that plays into this that I didn't talk about is the myth of scarcity, right? Like this idea that there's not enough of anything to go around, so we got to compete for what resources there are, right? And that guides our interactions with each other. So we've got this, oh, everybody, gets ahead by their own merit, and resources are hard to come by. So those people that have all the resources, they deserve them. Like neither of those things are the truth at all. There's more than enough of everything for everybody. About distribution, not about existence of resources. It's 1% of the population has way more resources than they need. That's the truth, right? It's not this idea that we just don't have enough. It's some people have more than enough, and we don't look at that part. We like just look at the scarce. Oh, well, you deserve it if you don't have enough stuff. Like the all of this is just like, I'm going to be honest, I'm a burn it down person at this point with our culture and our systems. The more I realize how much every single system is perpetrating harm on people, every single system was set up to keep power right where it is. uh, we can keep having trauma because of the power systems. It's really, it needs to be done. It needs to be done. Revolution, guys. It's time. We're hurting people. Nobody not nobody here today is on the winning end of the way our systems are right now. And that's
When
not cool.
when I hear you say revolution, I just right away jump to, yeah, I'm doing a personal revolution, a mini revolution, a whatever, right? And so it's that reminder that revolution can be big or small, it can be collective, it can be personal, it can be one change to your morning routine at a time, right? In my world, at least. I know some people may
Yes.
feel, no, it has to be all or nothing, burn it down, right? And I really
But
think,
that's a trauma response. All or nothing is always a trauma response. There's always a middle. There's always a
right?
middle.
Just just find those revolution points for you to get the joy, to get the healing, to get the power and control of your life where you can, right? And your reactions and your responses.
Yeah, absolutely. Good one.
for me, being able to cook my own food, having time to cook food, having time to buy beautiful vegetables, prep them, wash them, cook them, eat them, that's a little revolution for me, right? Our US society will have us running so much, working so much that we grab for fast food, we grab for prepackaged meals, things that are already ready, easy to eat, ready to go. And so every time I cook, I think that's me pushing back a little bit and saying, and taking control and saying, wow, this is something that really works for me, while also being a rhythmic activity and creative activity that's also healing for my brain as I chop veggies and nourish myself.
Nice. Eating and sleeping.
Thank
Good,
you.
right? Yes.
Right?
That's a perfect place to start.
Thanks.
Oh, Zoom user is really Andrea, huh? Cool.
Hi, how are you?
Great. How are you?
Good. I really appreciated the feedback. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm actually an NPE ×3. Grew up with a lot of
They probably don't even know what an NPE is, believe it or not.
misattributed parental events. So uh, basically, I through an ancestry test discovered who my biological father was. My mother had been married 5 times, told me someone else was my father. The day before my son's wedding, told me another person was my father. So, um, so I look at this, the reason I wanted to participate in this is because I really want to learn about generational trauma. Because like,
That sounds like generational trauma right there.
Yes, yes. And my question is like, how do you identify where that generational trauma is coming in so you don't let it impact your kids? Like for me, like my mom, she was so tight-lipped about, my God, everything, you know. And so I've learned through this discovery that I disassociate a lot because of the dysfunctional home that I grew up in and the scarcity of food, the scarcity of father figure, that kind of thing. And so since I made the discovery, I'm like, oh my God, like what have I been affected by otherwise that might have impacted my children? So I am a woman of faith, and I'm so grateful that my journey has taken me through incremental healings along the process, along my whole entire life. I mean, I became a Christian at, a very young age. And I know that it's by God's grace that he came into my life at such a young age because of the craziness. And I thought I was normal until this,
Right.
quote unquote normal.
All we know
Because
is what we see.
yeah, I've been working so hard my whole life not to be like them, not to, touch
I know.
alcohol or drugs, not to do this, not to do this. And so I have these propensities when I see like evil or bad behaviors or that type of stuff, I immediately back out of a situation. But I'm completely non-confrontational. Like I just have lost my voice, and that's part of the trauma too, is feeling like nobody cares about what I have to say. So it's just, I know it's an awareness, but can you speak to any other part of that to like, how do you sit back and say, okay, that is generational trauma? Because when I speak to my mother about it and say, hey, you were molested as a child, your mother left on Christmas Day, you and your siblings, you had to go into a foster care and then to an orphanage, and she just can't remember details. She was sexually molested, and then I'm just discovering little tidbits along the way, but just really want to get a professional opinion. Like, how do you identify that? Because I want to be able to put a finger on.
I think you've already
What it is.
identified a lot of it. Like what you just said is right. Like, the fact that your mom experienced sexual abuse, what is in some ways explains all of these right? Like, so you come to see that your value is in sex and sexuality. That's who you are. That's what you're about. and she made choices romantically that bore out her own, how she saw herself, her only value, right?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
those choices absolutely impacted you. Her choices of who to have her, the whole sort of inability. She did not see any of her own stuff, I'm guessing. Like she
And she
didn't see it.
still doesn't, like, she still doesn't, like, I still can have yet to hear her tell me the truth about the scenario. And she does a lot of bypassing, and I've tried very, very hard over the years as a Christian woman to allow my faith to direct me. And thank God I have, because my God, imagine what I could have turned out to be had, God not intervened so early in my life. Um, but I just don't want anything to ever impact my children. And now they're 27 and 18, but I don't want to wait till it's too late to identify those things to say, hey, I'm sorry, if I acted this way, or, especially with disassociating. Maybe you could speak to that. Like, how do you just stop disassociating from things so that you,
I don't know that you can just stop. I mean, I think
or
the
modify the
awareness of it.
behavior? Yeah, modify the behavior.
I think with everything you said, your awareness of it is going to be huge, right? Like, agree. I had no idea how that I probably dissociated quite a bit myself too, right? I was sort of not trying to be in the, when I figured it out was at the I was having dental surgery and they were like, you are such a good dental surgery patient. And I was like, oh, that's not what I want to be. But I'm very able to sort of send my mind somewhere. This isn't happening right now. I'm somewhere else.
Yeah.
Blah, blah.
Yeah.
And then we got all this mindful what's happening. And so, like right in there, the attention pieces, you can see this whole like whether you're focusing on it or not focusing on it, right? Pretending that it's like you're not even seeing what's happening, or you're right. You focusing on what's happening is so painful that you can't. That's why you're disassociating, right?
Yeah.
Like, so just recognizing that that's a coping mechanism. It's worked well for you. It's a decent coping mechanism. You like, it's not going to be that easy to throw it out, but seeing it and recognizing like, wow, that horrible thing happened and I barely remember doing that or being there, or just the awareness. I also love that you talked about incremental stuff, right? That's the timing. And like there's like I love your enthusiasm for healing and for your enthusiasm in general. I love, and I love you. But like we can't do it all at once, right? It is a process that happens over time. I think it's unpacking the stuff, starting with whatever's the most distressing in the moment, like, and
Yeah.
doing as much as you can. This is I mean, I wish that I could be like, oh, just this, and this, and you're done. I don't think any of us is ever gonna be done unpacking this, making sense of this. But the fact that
Well,
we're trying and
yeah.
doing it.
I continue to pray, like, Lord, reveal to me where my weakness is, where I've been traumatically injured and don't recognize it because I thought that was normal. And I believe that, he's a gentleman and will reveal. But I'm just so concerned about my kids. Like, God, did I mess them up? Just
You
like-
stop it. Quit it. Cut it out. You're doing great. You're doing great. And you do have to think, when you do think generational trauma, like right there with you, I'm always like, oh my God, I totally screwed up. I let my kid have this bad experience because I didn't see it. Right. But when I think about what my childhood, like, I messed some stuff up. He will tell you, but
Yeah.
I feel like it's definitely better than how it was for me. Right.
Yeah.
And I know that your kids are having a much better experience than you had. Like
Oh,
from the pieces I
a million
know, I
times
promise
over.
you that's the
Yeah.
truth. Right.
But my other challenge is isolationism. Like, it is so easy for me to just be like, everybody leave me alone. I'll just lock myself in my room. I
I
go to
was thinking
church.
about that too as an unpack. Like if you've experienced abuse, like your belief is I'm only safe when I'm by myself.
Yeah.
And if you have an I'm only safe when I'm by myself belief, well, that's going to be a barrier to close relationships. That's going to be a barrier to the relationships that you want.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think you're doing the work. You don't need any, like you are
I'm trying really hard.
doing
Yeah.
great.
I'm trying really, really hard. But, you know, my discovery was only a year and a half ago. So, you know, and the fact that my mother will not admit the truth, it makes it hard because as a parent, you know, she was the one, literally one person I could trust growing up. And so that discovery kind of like, okay, I made excuses for you your whole life, and still tried to be kind and respectful and honor you. But now this discovery, and you're just telling me let sleeping dogs lie. Well, that's not going to work for me. So,
And you get to decide, right?
yeah.
Like that is that is what we always want to